Sunday, October 4th, 2015 is World Communion Sunday. I had an opportunity to sit down with Mamie Plate, mother of Lindy Tanis, for this interview to be shared in part with Wesley Park United Methodist Church. Mamie shares with us her experience of growing up in Latvia, some of the struggles of her life, some of the harsh things that people have done to one another throughout our history. She shares with us ways that perhaps God has moved in the world and in her life, and also the struggles that people continue to experience today, and a reliance on the bread that binds us together as one body. Did you get a chance to take a look at the questions?
Yeah, I did actually. I jotted a few
Okay.
things down.
Yeah. We can change them and make them work for you. We can add to them. You don't have to be limited to them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Were there any that felt that we should change up?
Well, the one that's hard to, like number 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I don't really need anything to remind me.
Yeah.
Because that's who I am. That's where I came from.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know for that one. I was trying to think. Are there like
but there is
Christmas
a Latvian
customs?
Community here,
Sure.
and there are some customs.
Yeah.
That we still follow.
I was thinking like some of the food that you make,
make
or things
year.
that remind you of your mother or your grandmother or your family. So that's kind of what I was thinking there.
Yeah, those things.
Yeah.
But those come. See, like I don't look at those as reminders. I just look at those as this is what we do.
It's who you are.
This is part of me.
Yeah.
The one thing maybe that could be a reminder would be like the Latvian community here.
Yeah.
And the fact that, we still have the church and we still have the association. We still, like as a group, like we commemorate our, like November will be our Independence Day, which we're going to mark. And there's a day in June that we mark that we remember the victims of the first Russian deportation, and then now we've added the ones, from the other ones, which are basically only Latvian.
Yeah.
They're not associated with anything else. They're not like Christmas or Easter.
But that's your community that helps you honor and remember and tell the story to Kurgan and the generations to follow. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to ask about your faith community and what that Latvian faith community means to you. So that's kind of why I threw that question in there also.
That to me it's a difficult question because there was a period in my life where I totally lost my faith.
Sure. I know that. Yeah.
And then I'm actively working on it now to rebuild it, and I'm looking back at some of the events in my life that I think that maybe there was some higher power that intervened rather than it just being something that happened or a coincidence or, whatever I attributed it to before.
I was wondering, as you look back, are there places that you can see that were coincidental, that were good fortune, that was hard work and good luck, those types of things?
There are 3 very, very distinct events that now when I look back at them, I'm saying to myself, there had to be somebody looking out for us, because it's too much of a coincidence. One was, this was in the fall of 1944. We were in a German refugee camp, which was a horrible place, and we were being basically resettled and sent to places where like the adults, like my parents, were going to have to work. And so our family and a group of other families were being, and this camp was in the north, in northern Germany. It was very close to Essen, if you know, that was the German steel.
Okay.
The place where most of the German arms were built at one point.
Okay.
And consequently was bombed like almost constantly.
It was a target.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we were very happy to get out of there. And we were being shipped by train. The place where our dad was going to work was in the German Alps, which is all the way down across Germany. And I, as a child, I remember there was this big discussion. We were going to have a railroad car, whether we wanted this car to be at the end of the train or at the front of the train. And most of the people were saying, well, we don't want to be close to the locomotive, because when they bombed the locomotive because they want to disable the train. Wow. So we want to be at the end. Well, for whatever reason, it turned out that we were right behind the locomotive anyway. And about halfway down Germany, the train was hit from the rear by another train. Now, had we been at the rear of that train, we would have been done for, but we were not.
Wow.
And then...
And you were a little kid at this point.
10.
10 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we were... Dad was working in the German Alps, and the man that he was working for and on whose property we were living was a genuine fascist. He was just 100% for Hitler. And the Germans were taking people, young people from like the Ukraine and Poland and some of the conquered territories, and shipping them to Germany to work. And these were people like 17, 18, 19. My dad was 50-something. Also, these people were single. They had no families, to house or feed, so he decided that it was better for him to get more of these people rather than us. So he announced to Dad that he didn't need us anymore because he had these people. And what he was going to do with us was he was going to ship us to Dachau. Well, you know what Dachau was.
I do, yeah.
So my dad went ballistic, and he went to this other village where some of the families with whom we had come together were living. And there was a German lady whose husband had been killed in the war who heard this, and she said, if his only problem with you is that he doesn't have room for you, I have this little house on the side of the mountain where you can live. So she sent her oxen and her wagon, and we threw our stuff in, and we went off to this little paradise on the side of the mountain, which was just one of the most absolutely gorgeous places I've ever been in my life.
The biggest contrast you can imagine.
Just unbelievable, and there she was. Now, had she not been there, who knows? And then we had a third one, which was, this was after the end of the war. Now, these same people, young people who had been forcibly sent, they wanted to go home.
Yeah.
They were ready to go back to Russia, to Poland, to wherever. We were not. We did not want to go back to Russia because that's why we had left in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the Americans did not know enough to separate us from them. We were Eastern Europeans, and Eastern Europeans wanted to go home.
Mm-hmm.
So again, these same families
Mm-hmm.
that had been shipped south by the Germans, we were rounded up, and American Army sent their trucks, and our stuff was thrown in together with the, with these
the
other
Eastern
people
Europeans.
who all were happy to go back. We had asked that we all be put on one truck, and that happened. So the first black man that I ever saw in my life was the driver of this army truck who was driving us. And I'm not sure exactly how far Munich was from where we were, but we drove, and just outside of Munich somewhere, they made a potty stop. All this column of trucks stopped so that we could go in the woods and do our thing. And one of the Latvian men that was part of the families, the Latvian families, he spoke English.
Mm-hmm.
So he said to this black man, "You're taking us where we don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just leave us here by the side of the road?" And he said, "I don't want to take you where you don't want to go. The truck will drive whether it's full or empty."
Mm-hmm.
So he helped us throw our stuff out, and he left us by the side of the road and took off. And to this day, I hope he didn't get in trouble.
Yeah.
Being in the army for letting us do this.
Uh-huh.
But we blessed him forever.
Wow.
And then this is like now evening is coming, and there's a little ways from the road we can see a little bombed out village where most of the houses are either half standing or not standing, and these two old German ladies come out of
the ruins.
Out of the ruins, and they come over to this group of people, and they invited us in. They had nothing but a basement. Yeah. The above ground part of their house was gone. Mm. And they invited us in, and we spent several days there till, from there we actually went to the United Nations refugee camp. Mm-hmm. But they let us stay till the men went into Munich, and they found the camp, and we got settled.
Without them, you'd just be stranded on the side of the road, in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Wow. And without that black man, we would probably have been in Siberia, or who knows, worse.
Yeah.
Because all of the people who had become refugees and then had gone back totally got deported. Mm-hmm. To Siberia. The Russians did not like the fact that we had gone with the Germans, and
So your fate was sealed if you had gone back.
Absolutely,
it was
without
no
question.
Future.
Without question.
Yeah. So you look back in those, and you see providence. You see that you were cared for
somehow
in a tremendous way.
Yeah. Which I have to be honest, at the time I did not. Mm-hmm. For one, as a child, I was so overwhelmed by all these things that kept happening that I didn't even really process it. Mm-hmm. That, some of these thoughts came long after.
Yeah. What about living through all of that unrest, and you saw the worst that human beings can do? You knew what was going on, I'm sure, all around you, even as a young girl. Is that something that has been at the forefront of your trying to understand God's presence in the world? I mean, has that been a struggle? How can
Exactly.
those types of things happen?
See, to me, it's like if he's omnipotent and if he knows everything and if he's good, then how can he possibly allow this to go? I have this difficulty between the all-powerful God and free will of man. I can't quite.
Where does one stop and the other start? Yeah.
Yeah. I cannot put that, and like as a kid when that was happening, I remember having these thoughts. I thought, okay, God is the Father, and but if a father did what I'm almost feeling like he's doing, or he's not caring that others are doing. I mean, how would we look on the Father like that?
What kind of a father would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it gets to that core of that theological struggle.
Yeah.
Why is there evil in the world? Why is there pain?
Yeah.
Why do the most innocent and vulnerable suffer?
Yeah.
How do we understand that and also believe and embrace a benevolent God?
Yeah, and even when something horrible happens, and in a way I admire people who have faith like that, because I think it's easier to live. Who will just say, well, it's God's will. And I want to say, if you'll excuse my language, why in the hell is that God's will? Why would he will something like that on you or on me or on whoever?
And so that's not the God that you could embrace.
No.
And you've been through a whole life journey trying to figure out if there is a God, then what kind of a God could I embrace? And what are the characteristics of God if this world is filled with this kind of pain?
Yeah.
That's a lifelong
And I've been watching the Pope.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed. Twice now I've heard him say, those of you who believe, pray for me. And if you don't believe, wish me well.
Yeah.
What a guy, for crying out loud.
To recognize.
Yeah, that everybody does not.
Yeah.
And not to exclude them or condemn them or
belittle them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to invite them in as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a wisdom that comes from that from life. I mean, you don't have to go through all that you've lived through to recognize that life is pretty difficult and filled with so much pain.
Yeah.
But your life in particular has shown you that. And here you are, looking back and looking forward and trying to, I guess, make sense of how it all.
Yeah.
What was it like then, growing up, before you left your home?
Well, the thing is, my memory begins mostly with the first Russian occupation of Latvia.
Okay.
I was 6 years old when they first came in. And so, in effect, I was 6 years old when the war started. As a matter of fact, I have a very distinct memory. My brother is 5 years younger than I am, and he was born in 1939, and he was being baptized at home, at our home on our farm, on September 1, 1939. And I can remember we were all standing outside. It was a nice day. And then somebody had a radio somewhere. And I don't remember if it was a neighbor that came or how this happened, but somebody said the war started.
Wow.
And I did not know what war was. I mean,
Yeah.
6 years old, barefoot kid standing on the farm.
Yeah.
But the way that the people reacted, I just somehow felt that things were not going to be the same. And they weren't ever again. Because it was just so different.
Your world was about to turn upside down.
Absolutely. And how, just that feeling that, and I didn't know whether it was going to be good or bad, but I felt that it was not going to be the same. Just from from watching the reaction of all the people around.
And this happened on the day of your brother's baptism.
Yes.
You'll never forget it.
No.
You lived on a farm? What did it look like? Was it mountainous or flat?
No, Latvia is sort of like northern Michigan. The topography, the lay of the land is, little hills. A lot of farms, like where we were definitely in a farming area.
What did you grow? Do you remember?
We did mostly, we grew grain. We had some dairy. I know we sold milk. And then we grew stuff to feed we had like hay and oats and stuff to feed we grew some wheat, some rye. We made our own bread, took the grain to the mill and ground it into flour and brought it home and used it for making bread. We grew all our own vegetables, potatoes, the whole thing.
So you had a pretty self-sufficient, independent life.
So,
and
very
then
much so.
The war came.
Yeah.
And it was no longer safe to be there?
It became, we sort of had a choice, and I'm now saying the choice at that time was not mine. It was with the adults, in the family and with the adults of the whole Latvian country. And my story, by the way, is not unique. My story is basically the story of all of the refugees of World War II with, some individual variations, but all the people, the Lithuanians, the Estonians, the Poles, all the people who went through this, who experienced the first Russian occupation in 1940. And I guess I shouldn't say Russians, I guess I should say communist Russians. It was so awful that there was no way that many of us wanted to go through it again. So when Germans came, which was Hitler and his army, they were actually the lesser of the two evils for us.
The Russian occupation was
worse. Because the Russians, anybody who had land, who had, or who owned a bigger piece of land, was the enemy. Anybody who had a business, who, they were all capitalists, and capitalists were the enemy. So, and there's another thing that just now came to my mind, which I guess I'll put that in a little later. So when the Germans started losing the war, which was in 1944, and they started retreating, because they had gone quite far into Russia, they made it to Moscow, they just never got to take Moscow. And they started retreating in 1943, and by 1944, they were at our border. And in the summer of 1944, they started retreating back into Latvia, and the Russians started coming into Latvia again. And the people kept moving west. Those who chose not to stay kept moving west. And then when the front was almost by where we were, we left home. We threw our stuff in wagons and hitched up our horses and left.
Wow.
And eventually ended up going to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
There were people who didn't want to go to Germany, who took greater chances than we did, who went in little fishing boats and whatever they could find that floated and tried to get to Sweden, because Sweden was neutral.
Mm-hmm.
It did not take part in the war. And many of them lost their lives at sea trying to get there, but quite a few of them made it. Mm-hmm. And we went to Germany, and I can remember being on the troop ship, and this again, as a kid, not getting it. I was so sad. We were all crying. We did not want to leave Latvia, but we were leaving. And then there were German soldiers on the same boat who were singing. And I didn't get it. They were going home. I was leaving home.
Yeah.
But they were going home, and I didn't get it. Why were they so happy if we were so sad? That's something that I understand now. But I didn't then. That was one of the things.
How confusing for a kid.
Yeah, it was just like, why are they singing?
Yeah, this is not a
It's
happy time.
Like, make them stop.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
Anyway, the what I wanted to say was that's another instance. In June of 1941, then Hitler and Stalin were already at war. They had declared war on each other. The Russians did like a huge mass deportation. In one night, they deported like 15,000 people from Latvia to Siberia, and Latvia only has 2 million people all told.
Wow.
So many people got deported, and they already started that a little bit before that night. They were rounding people up. And next to our farm was a farm where there had always lived this one man, and again, I don't even remember his name, even though I should, who, and I can remember this, they used to say, people used to whisper about him, he's red. Like he's coming, he's red.
Yeah.
He did not own any land. He worked for the landowner on whose land he lived. Well, when the Russians came, they took a piece of our land and gave it to him. And when these deportations started, he came to my dad and he told my dad, you better get lost because you're on the list. So we went and we lived in the forest for like 2 weeks.
Wow.
Till this
deportation?
Germans came, actually, in effect, till the Germans came in. Then we went back home. And so that's how we escaped. And then our my father's sisters who lived with us did not go in the forest with us because we had animals that needed to be fed. And they said that somebody came with a truck, and asked for Dad. And they just said he's not home. And so apparently they didn't look very hard. They just left.
It's hard to put my mind around that, being on edge, wondering if someone's going to herd you up and send you to a place you don't want to go. when you see the refugees, like the Syrian refugee
it just breaks
crisis,
my heart.
I mean, you can almost identify with this run for your life.
Yes.
And you don't know where you're going to or if it's going to be safe.
And see, we were very, when I look at them now and I think, I don't quite understand why the United Nations is not doing anything for them, because the camps that we lived in after the war were run by the United Nations. Mm-hmm. They provided at first it was, I forget what, it's something like United Nations Refugee and Resettlement, something or other. And then it was the IRO, which was the International Refugee Organization. But see, those agencies, I think, are closed. Like, they don't exist by the United Nations anymore, because once the World War II refugees were taken care of, I think they dissolved those organizations. We also were helped to come over here by an organization which I also don't know if it still exists, which was Church World Service, which was an association of churches.
I was on the board for Church World Service for a long time.
Oh, cool.
They still are at work.
Good.
They'd like to know that they were of service.
They certainly were.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that got us. They're the ones who received us when we got off the boat, and they're the ones who put us on the train to the farm where we were to work. And I think they are also the ones who found us the sponsor.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the moral obligation is for care for refugees? What do you think that the world should do to respond to a crisis?
Well, first off, I don't quite know how to. I think somewhere along the line, we've got to learn, and I find it very hard to believe that in thousands and thousands of years, we have not learned that killing each other is not the answer. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been settling our disputes like that from time immemorial. Mm-hmm. We've accomplished nothing, and we've learned nothing from it. It just doesn't work. Mm-mm. But we keep doing it. And see, and then there's another, why does God allow it?
Exactly.
Or isn't it his business? I don't know.
Yeah, and then I think the hardest thing to do is to advocate for peace when everyone else is rattling swords.
Yes. Then you're non-patriotic, you're.
Yeah. And the model that I look to for Jesus is he never picked up a weapon. He never called people to violence. Those that follow him don't necessarily have those same types of ethics and standards for human beings.
And same as capital punishment, if the commandment says, it doesn't say thou shalt not kill, except it just says don't do it. And how can we, that's another whole story.
No, it connects with all these other pieces. How do we make sense of how to live through this world and make the best choices that we can? And it deals with how you treat people who, with their families in some cases, are on the run because governments or armies or neighborhoods or whatever are just too dangerous. What do we do?
Yeah.
It calls us to that very basic question of how do we treat each other.
And then I look at, places like Hungary, and you go, well, why are they doing that? But they are a country with very limited resources. They're not a very big country. They're very small. And I think they're just plain being overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of people whom they basically can't help.
So the issue must be bigger than that, bigger than the responsibility of one small country.
Yeah.
So what's the world? If we're talking
and
about
all those countries where they're going to, they're not the most prosperous countries in Europe yet. You know, the Balkan countries and Hungary and how are they supposed to do it all by themselves?
When we talk about World Communion Sunday, it's more than just a loaf of bread and a cup. There needs to be something more about the world responsibility toward human being to human being, and I don't want us to lose focus of what our obligations are. And this is one clear case where we can't assume that
somebody else is going to do it.
Yeah, it's not our business.
Yeah.
When you speak Latvian, does that does that help bring you back to your roots? I think we started off by saying that is part of you.
It is. It's not something that's separate. There are some things still that I can best say in Latvian. There are now also some things that I can't say in Latvian because, like a lot of things from my profession, I have a hard time talking about in Latvian because I didn't learn it in Latvian. I don't have the words, but there are some things that just fit.
Any examples of what you just can't translate it enough into English? Anything that you can pull to mind?
Nothing comes to mind right now. I haven't.
Yeah, not an easy question, but it's an interesting thing. Whether it's the way that you talk to John or articulate a thought about whatever food or something like that. If you can't find the English word.
There are no English words for some of the food. Like, I don't know if you ever had any pira.
No, I don't think I have.
Well, you'll have to have some. I'm making some for Lindy's bash.
Okay.
There's no English word for it.
Yeah. Well, there's some. I would imagine, this is my own guess, is that there's something really meaningful that connects you not only to your brother and your mother and father, but all the 2 million, Latvians and all those that have come before. I'd imagine there's something that gives you a sense of place and a pride or an identity. Does your church have? Is it called the Latvian community, or what do you call that?
It's called the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Grand Rapids. Latvian Evangelical Lutheran Church of Grand Rapids.
Okay, but really, what it is the Latvian community in this.
Yes.
It's more than just a church. It's a connection to.
We have two places. We have what is called the Grand Rapids Latvian Association, and they have a building.
Okay.
And then the church is on Knapp Street, between Dean Lake and Ball.
Sure.
On the right-hand side of the road. That's ours.
Okay. So you meet with them,
We have services twice a month. There just aren't enough of us left here that
Are there any younger families that are moving into the area?
No. That's our lack, and that's why we worry about the existence of our church, because the young people are like, Rita is not living here. Lindy is married to Ty and going to Ty's church.
Yeah.
it's just, a lot of people have moved away,
Yeah.
the younger ones.
Yeah.
And some of the younger ones have married with Americans and are not. And we also have this dilemma. Okay, for Ty to come to our church, he doesn't understand the word that we're saying.
Mm-mm.
For them to start having services in English, I'm saying, this is my church. Why are you giving? I want it in Latvian,
Mm-hmm.
because that's part of my heritage.
Mm-hmm. You lose
and
that.
so, our poor little minister is like between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't,
Yeah.
She tries. If she sees someone in church
Mm-hmm.
on the particular day that she knows is not a Latvian, she will at least translate a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
into English.
Yeah.
But the old Latvians don't like that. We don't, and I can't say that we don't like it, but that's one of our Latvian things that hold us to our Latvian
Mm-hmm.
soul, is that the church is the way it's been all our lives, and it's, all the same words and the same stuff that we're used to.
The one constant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't
And then
change
if you
that
start
just to...
changing that, then it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's hard.
Yeah.
And even they have taken some of the words to some of the rituals, which were in Latvian very awkward because they were translated so long ago,
Mm-hmm.
that the language is strange.
Almost
sort
like a
of.
King James version is not quite the way that we speak in English
Yes.
anymore. Yeah.
But like, to me, like when they say the creed, they've taken some of the words out that really were sort of awkward, and they've actually made them better.
Mm-hmm.
But when I say it, I'm saying it in my head the way I learned it when I was a kid, with all those awkward words, because that's the way it always was.
That's the way it always will be.
And it's not. You have to move, I think, a little bit, but
yeah. Do you celebrate communion at your church? Do you have Eucharist?
Yeah, they do. I don't do it very often, but they have it every service. They have.
Okay, every service.
Yeah.
Every service, and
which is also different,
mm.
because in the olden days it was more or less like on special holy days,
Mm-hmm.
or if it was a special occasion
Mm-hmm.
for you that you wanted to commemorate or mark or whatever, then you went to communion.
Mm-hmm.
You did not go every Sunday.
And you have a particular reverence for it or understanding of it, where you confess your sin, you ready your heart, and so your heart kind of needs to be prepared to receive communion. Is that kind of how you particularly think about communion? And sometimes you're more ready to receive it than others, and sometimes you'd rather not. And
I don't really know how I think about it.
Sometimes people refuse or choose not to receive communion because they just don't feel like they're...
I don't want to do it all the time because, and I think that's, again, because I'm back in the past. It was always associated with something special.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do it all the time, then you lose that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably my biggest feeling about it, my strongest feeling about it, that I don't want to... I'm not ready to do it all the time. I want to do it at certain special times.
Mm-hmm.
more or less, I guess, in my life.
So it can mean even more when you do receive it because it's a special experience,
Yeah.
a special moment. Had you ever heard of World Communion Sunday? Is that something that's part of your faith? You kind of got the idea of what it is. I mean,
yeah.
Is there something significant that you might think about for the whole world to stop and recognize that there's something in the breaking of the bread and there's something in the sharing of a cup? Is there something that you could think of that might be significant in the way that you see the world in the invitation for many different faith communities to celebrate communion on the same day?
Well, I think it is something that sharing bread is like I can't think of the words to put into words what it is I'm trying to say.
It makes me think of when you were describing what you grew on your farm, and
it is
the wheat and the things that you needed to do to grind the grain to make your own bread. It seems like it's the root of what we need.
It is, and it's a very basic need, and it's something that sort of binds us all together because having bread to put in your mouth is probably one of the most basic needs of the people, and it doesn't matter who you are or what you are, or we all need it. That's one thing that we all have in common above everything else and above all our differences.
And so it's a literal feeding of our basic need. We need bread. We need to survive.
And it's also like a celebration because whether it's in the family or whether it's stretching it a little bit outside of the family, how do we celebrate the most? We have a meal.
Yeah.
We share. That's such a vital part of something that binds us together, or a common bond, or whatever it is, that celebration with some food.
So it's a great image that you're painting about the world sitting down for a meal together and recognizing that we have basic needs, and pulling in the refugee, your situation of finding a safe harbor, and current refugees today. Thinking about Jesus, who was a refugee himself, whose family was on the run because the government was out to slaughter anyone who was a threat. We meet at the table.
Yeah.
And at the table, maybe there's a possibility of peace or understanding in a deeper way.
And if you lose the hope of that possibility, then it's a very bleak world.
Yeah.
Because if we continue to go on like we're going now, I don't know. We're going to blow ourselves up.
Yeah. So what's the hope? The hope is
that we sit down at the table together and
having a meal.
Quit chopping each other's heads.
Yeah. Turn away from violence. Turn toward feeding each other. Turn away from war. Turn toward caring for each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What's Latvia like now? Is it a peaceful place, or?
It's it's kind of a different place. They're trying. I have to put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying, but their church, the Lutheran Church in Latvia, is, I think, one of the most conservative.
Mm.
The bishop that they have, the Archbishop of Latvia, he will not ordain women, and we here are the beneficiaries of it because we get all those. We have no young people who would be ministers in our churches, and we, like at our church, the young woman who is our minister she was educated in Latvia, but could not be ordained, so she came here, and she became ordained, and she's been the minister in our church since 1998 or whatever.
So good for you.
Good for we benefit from his whatever.
A narrow look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, they have their government. They have government difficulties because I think they haven't gotten rid yet of the people who grew up under the communist system. And so they don't really understand, they don't really fully understand democracy. And they don't really fully understand that paying taxes is the good thing to do, not being able to evade them. Which under the communist system, they prided themselves on basically like on what they could get away with. The first time we went back to Latvia, we went and visited a friend of John's with whom John had gone to school back before the war, in the dark ages.
Yeah, a long time ago. Friend.
And the first thing he said to us is, he had a table set like for a feast. He said, and he said it with great pride, nothing on this table was bought across the, what do you call it in the store? A counter. Everything came from under the counter.
That's quite a way to live.
So
yeah.
And that sometimes is still their problem, is that they the people in power first fill their own pockets, and then if there's anything left, then that goes to the rest of the and they fight that and fight that and fight that, and they have great difficulties with it. And also then the people who have sort of made it financially are very unwilling to share it.
So the rich are getting richer?
Yeah. And we just there's a lady visiting here right now that John and I took to see Lake Michigan yesterday. And we had also taken her to Meyer Gardens, and she was absolutely speechless that Lena and Fred, had done this for the city. And she said, we have people who could be doing it, but they're not doing it. She said, nobody donates.
Yeah. So the giving back.
Yeah. Is not yet.
And it all goes back to communion too. How do you care for each other? How do you sit at the table? How do you feed somebody rather than keeping it all for yourself?
That's right. You need to share.
When you're refugees, how do you help somebody who's in need? How does that army driver understand that he can leave you on the side of the road and that's what you need?
That was amazing.
How does that person give you a home, to stay? Um, how do we treat each other? How do we learn to it's okay to treat each other that way?
Yeah.
World Communion Sunday, hopefully it will help us.
And see, I keep talking about those German ladies too, because we tend to think that every German who lived in Hitler's Germany was bad or whatever.
A Nazi and a killer.
And they weren't.
Yeah.
There were a lot of good people there who were caught in an impossible situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like so long ago, but it wasn't that long ago at all. I mean, you've lived
there.
You've lived through
it.
You've lived through it. I don't think people recognize that that was not that long ago.
Yeah. And see, we keep this. I keep going back to that. We keep fighting the war to end all wars, but it never ends.
Never will. Not if we take that route.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do this blessing at the end of some services, and I was wondering if you might be able to say it, and I might be able to play it at the end of our worship service on October 4th.
We do it at the end of every service.
Yeah. You're very familiar with it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you be able to say it in Latvian?
Sure.
Okay.
They say, tas kungs, lai tevi svētī un pasargā, tas kungs, lai paceļ savu vaigu uz tevi un ir tev žēlīgs, tas kungs, lai paceļ savu svēto vaigu pār tevi un dod tev savu mieru.
I could understand that. I could, just because it's the same thing that I say as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some things that are universal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've said that's one of the things that from way back in Latvia, I personally never went to church because church was 17 kilometers away from us, which was a major trip with a horse and buggy.
Mm-hmm.
And there was work to be done. Even, on Sunday you had to feed animals and you had to, so parents, that was a different matter, but us children, I had never been. So my first experience, like being in a church building, was in Germany when we were living in the refugee camp, and we held services in Latvian, but we held them in a German church, which I don't know whether we rented or how we got it, I don't know, but so ours would usually be a little bit later in the day, like after they were done with theirs. And the one thing that I always remember is at the end of the service, the minister going with his hand, raised and
probably with this blessing,
with those blessings, those words.
Yeah, it takes you all the way back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And see, that's another thing of the continuity that connects you back to your roots or whatever you call them.
Yeah.